If New York is the city that never sleeps, it's largely because of its subway. No other city, not London with its tube, nor Paris with its metro, offers its residents underground transport 24 hours a day, year-round. Coney Island is the depot from which many of the trains pull out. This is the largest such facility in the world, where over 1,000 carriages are stored, scrubbed and serviced before they set out to cover the 230 miles that make up the system. Some have been turned into a rolling art form, at least in the eyes of the graffiti fiends. Many more have been replaced or reconditioned in a major offensive led by the city's transit authority to revitalize their stock. From the moment the first train started running in 1904, New Yorkers have shown an affinity for the clank and clatter of steel wheels on rail, and, despite its many shortcomings, every day over 3.5 million people still travel on the world's most celebrated subway. There are even a few who have traveled the entire length of the system, passing through the 463 stations that serve 4 of New York's 5 boroughs: Queens, Brooklyn, the Bronx, and Manhattan. 3 routes, the Interborough Rapid Transport, or IRT, Brooklyn Manhattan Transit, or BMT, and the IND for Independent, all converge on Manhattan Island, the nerve center of both city and subway. This is the New York known to millions who will never visit it. Below, less than 1 million people live in Manhattan, but every day over 5 million come to work or play there. The vast majority, 85% and rising, are transported by subway. David Gunn was appointed president of the New York City Transit Authority in 1984. His first task was to deal with the problems that had arisen in the mid-70s when the city almost went broke and crime, dirt and deterioration had driven thousands of riders off the subway and onto surface transport systems.
The city of New York cannot function without the subway. And the quality of the subway service has an impact in innumerable areas in this city. And there's no question in my mind that the city suffered as a result of the reputation of the New York City subway system. As the subway system gets back on its feet, begins to function well, and do its job in an increasingly effective manner, that redounds to the city's benefit. I mean, this is a city where the subway is part of the ethic and the ethos of the image of the city, the New York City subway system. It mirrors, in a sense, everything that's good and bad about the city. Everybody's down there. It's a very democratic experience because the city forces people to ride the subway. Almost everybody has to ride that subway system at one time or another. And so you see a complete cross-section of this city when you ride the subway system. They're all there. Everybody's down there. It's not only transportation, it's entertainment.
59th Street, the southern border of Central Park, and a frontier of sorts between Midtown and Uptown, between one way of life and another. Midtowners, who own some of the most expensive apartments in the world, meet Uptowners campaigning for basic rent controls. Little more in common than the daily dependence on the subway. The fare's the same for everyone. A $1 token takes you as far as you want to go. The social melting pot of New York never stops boiling. The earlier immigrant communities of European Jews, Italians, Irish, gave way to blacks, Hispanics, and Orientals. To the newcomers, usually poor and confused, the subway was as essential as ever. But even they tried to avoid using it. When a passenger used a gun against muggers, there was applause, but many New Yorkers saw their worst fears realized. Even without Bernard Goetz, the New York press has always ensured that subway travelers were fully aware of the risks they take.
Obviously, what you're dealing with is the perception of that people have of the subway system, I think the subway system is safe. I ride it myself all the time, and I've ridden it every hour of the night and day. And the system statistically is safe. We have problems, but we're moving 5 million people a day in the system, and obviously you're going to have some crime.
If David Gunn were to ride out into Brownsville, East New York, and Brooklyn through the South Bronx, he'd probably need rubber underwear and a bulletproof vest. He'd have a far different view of the subway system that he feels is getting so much better. 149 Grand Concourse. All right, so make sure you spread out on the cars once you get in.
Curtis Sliwa is self-appointed leader of the Guardian Angels, a group of young vigilantes who strode out of the badlands of the South Bronx and into the city's imagination. The idea came to Sliwa, he claims, while he was a regular passenger on Train 4, the Muggers Express. The authorities regard the Angels with suspicion, although the mayor of New York welcomed their efforts. They have no particular authority. Should they catch anyone committing a crime, they can, like any citizen, detain them until the police arrive. So far as the Transit Authority is concerned, they are fare-paying passengers like any others.
The further you get away from the core of the city, Manhattan, and you get into the outer boroughs, more isolated the stations, far less police, and even the physical atmosphere is more depressing and more palatable to a wide variety of criminals. Assume that you were the victim of crime. You had just been robbed of your money, or raped, or attacked. Would you have been roaming about many minutes looking for police? Or might you not have just gotten back on the train, gone home, said some prayers, and thanked God that you were still alive? That's what typically happens to many victims. They can't stand around waiting for police. So when you see Guardian Angels in the subway train or on the platform, you feel better because you say, out of all the people who may be here at this point, if I were to be targeted by some criminal, pickpocket, jostler, sexual deviant, I know that these young men in the red berets will risk their life to defend me, even though they may not even know me, may be of different color or a different background. They're just about as close as you can get to those kind of superheroes, those comic book cartoon heroes that exist in real life. And the best thing is they're real people.
The Guardian Angels have since expanded their operations above ground to the more threatening neighborhoods served by the subway. Times Square, crossroads of the city, has lost much of its luster since the 20s and 30s, and today drug dealers of all kinds, particularly those specializing in the debilitating crack, share the sidewalk with bewildered tourists and Broadway theatergoers, all of them trying to dodge the hell-bent cab. This is New York at its most manic, and not surprisingly, the subway stop below has the system's highest crime rate. With 250,000 people passing through its maze of corridors and tunnels every day, it's also the most heavily patrolled. The Transit Police of New York are the 5th largest force in the country, with a jurisdiction that requires specialist training for underground crime fighting.
In 1987, there was about 1,650 homicides in New York City, throughout the entire city. 7 of those homicides occurred on the subway system. The New York City subway system has several contributing factors that lends itself to the perception of crime and fear on the system. First of all, it's underground. There is a natural tendency to be fearful of going under the ground. And now people not only have to deal with that initial fear, but they find themselves in an environment that is less than hospitable. And if they see somebody acting disorderly, or they see somebody evading the fare, jumping over a turnstile, or not paying their fare to get on the train, now they not only find themselves in a hostile environment, but they think that they're there with criminals. The vast majority of the transit police officers on patrol in the system at any given time are uniform officers. They're out there. Their primary purpose is to deter crime, to lend aid to passengers who need it, to make apprehensions of people who are committing crimes or committing minor violations, quality of life type of violations that detract from the environment.
Can you wait on the steps? Can you get up the steps, please? Push it over there. Can you get up the steps? Blocking the traffic here. It's a dangerous place to sit. Okay?
Every weekend, Grand Central Station is flooded with New Yorkers evacuating town. But deep below the grandeur of its concourse, there are daily dramas. This is Grand Central Tower, one of the subway's busiest control rooms, where high-tech means hands-on. While the system preserves an impressive safety record, traffic control depends on radio contact rather than computer automation, and margins of error are slight indeed.
Have your attention, please, Uptown riders, Uptown 4, 5, and 6 riders. Due to the fire department in the area of 14th Street, we have a delay in Uptown service. Arriving on the Uptown Express track now is the number 6 train. This train is being rerouted to Woodlawn Road. Disregard the signs, this Uptown number 6 being rerouted to Woodlawn and Jerome. We have extensive delays at this time. This number 6 train will be going to Woodlawn and Jerome.
A fire in the old wooden sleepers of the elevated tracks creates a familiar delay for the beleaguered controllers to deal with. At times, it seems this antiquated system is held together by rubber bands and string, a miracle that it works at all. It relies heavily on services like the city fire department. Less than half the $4 billion or so a year the subway needs to operate is raised from fares, and the shortfall must be made up by reluctant tax and road toll payers. There's never enough money to go round. The neglects of the 1970s forced safety to the top of the agenda for the transit authorities. To regain public confidence, their immediate priority has been upgrading maintenance facilities, rolling stock, and tracks. The big cleanup, they call it.
The New York City subway system had fallen on hard times. Basically, the entire physical plant was a wreck. Car fleet was a wreck. It was covered with graffiti. It was dirty. It didn't work well. It had tremendous deferred maintenance. The track was in real serious trouble, and all of the other infrastructure items, pumps, fans, and so forth, were in serious trouble. By rebuilding the system, we've been able to eliminate or drastically reduce the possibility of certain events, for example, a derailment or a fire, a serious fire. But on top of that, what we've done is, particularly with the car fleet, and we're really proud of that, we've gotten the car fleet so that 90% of the car fleet now looks pretty good. It's clean, it's free of graffiti, and of course it's running much better because we've rebuilt, over half the fleet is either new or rebuilt, and the rest of it will be done in the near future. But the car fleet is almost totally restored from a visual perspective.
Tiffany's, Trump Tower, Saks Fifth Avenue, Radio City Music Hall. Like the subway, every corner of New York seems as familiar as an old tune. Currently, the city is attracting 20 million visitors a year, most of whom seem to gather at lunchtime on Fifth Avenue. As gridlock spreads to the sidewalk, business executives take to the BMT to make their next appointment. For New Yorkers like author and columnist Jimmy Breslin, the subway is not only a means of avoiding the crowd.
New York is the only place I could live because I happen to be one of the 4 or 5 members of the free world who cannot drive a car. I must live atop a subway or I simply don't move. So I would sit in the back of cars smoking a cigar and giving directions to 1,000 different drivers, wives and relatives, and it drove them crazy. And I love that aspect of it, and then whenever I would get into a traffic jam with them, I'd just get out of the car and say goodbye, and I'd walk downstairs and get on the subway. It comes from Brooklyn all the way through to Manhattan. It takes someone from the crummiest slum in Brooklyn, a mother with kids with no chance to go anywhere, gets on a subway and takes them to the Museum of Natural History on 81st Street and Central Park West, or across the Fifth Avenue to the Museum of Art. Now that sounds like someone talking, yes, the glories of New York. It actually does happen. We have a poor population. It's to our shame forever. At the same time, we probably have the most cultured and smartest poor on the face of the earth because of the subway.
Nothing stays the same in New York. Upper Manhattan is pushing northwards, and Harlem, for years a black ghetto, is now under siege from property investors and gentrifiers. Reluctant tenants are being pushed further out, to the Bronx and beyond, as their brownstones and tenement blocks await a facelift. Residents like Mamie Stone have observed that lower prices are not the only reason the area is attracting so much attention.
This is the only part of town that I can think of, off the top of my head, that has all the subway systems that stop it. Now, what the train actually does is that it makes it possible for us to connect with the other parts of the city. New York itself, it makes it possible for us to connect with the Bronx. So we use it for work, we use it for play, we use it for interacting with people. Harlem right now is the most sought after real estate property in the world, I say. Right now, the homes that we struggle to hold on to, the places that some of the buildings that we can't afford to buy, to keep, to maintain, to renovate, that are closed, are now being bought up by other people. So that Harlem, that has now become a black Mecca, paradise, or even a place of not really beauty to other people, is now being sought by other people as their future home.
It's perhaps not surprising that the subway is partly responsible for pushing up property prices here. 125th Street is Harlem's main street, where 3 lines cross, served by no less than 10 different trains, among them the A train.
I remember myself as a child on the train, and it only cost a nickel to ride the subway. And we would get at the front end of the A train, and we would watch as the train swerved and curved and would speed down the rails. And that was part of our excitement. That was our entertainment.
Get on board the A train. Take a little ride around the city. Brooklyn, clear up to Harlem. You see, New York is mighty pretty. Take your baby subway riding. That's where a romance gotta be hiding. Oh, get your plane or airplane. You'll find New York is mighty pretty. Get aboard the A train.
New York's may not be the world's oldest subway. That's London. Nor the busiest. That's Tokyo. But the A train is undoubtedly one of the world's greatest subway rides.
New York is mighty pretty.
207th Street and Washington Heights, way up on the northern tip of Manhattan, is where the A train starts. Down through Harlem, it trundles on the L tracks before plunging below ground onto the Upper West Side, fringing Central Park, traveling south to take in some of New York's finest sights. Slower trains, which stop at all stations, are known as locals. As an express, the A train stops only at certain stations. Its official name is the 8th Avenue Express. Duke Ellington would have found that harder to put to music. Midtown, its first stop is 59th Street, then on to 42nd Street and Times Square. Expert subway riders know how to switch among the various routes to travel in the shortest possible time. Penn Station is where many will make their connection. Here, passengers can transfer to bus or mainline railway for ongoing journeys, or emerge into Madison Square Garden. Others will wait impatiently for their homeward-bound locals. Much of what is most shocking and exasperating about New York is encapsulated in Penn Station. Night and day it resembles a kind of Times Square undercover, a refuge in addition for the homeless who haunt the public spaces of this great and wealthy metropolis. The city that can move 5 million passengers in its subways and buses every 24 hours seems unable to house its few thousand social inadequates. For the A train, next stop is 14th Street and then West 4th and Washington Square, marking the invisible line between Midtown and downtown and Greenwich Village. This is prime real estate. The small streets taken over by affluent singles and young couples just beginning their climb up the ladder of prosperity. The once dominant Italian atmosphere has been diluted and mixed with other European influences. Old hangouts of writers and painters have to fight to keep their identity or resist being transformed into the next inn, restaurant or gallery, depending on the week or the weather. New Yorkers are nothing if not fickle. Every weekday, the majority of A-train commuters head further south to Chambers Street and the World Trade Center. Peak hour is 8:30, when trains disgorge thousands of office-bound workers into the country's major financial institutions. Wall Street is still its heart, and few American banks or brokers could afford not to have their headquarters nearby. This end of Manhattan Island was the site of the earliest European settlement in the 17th century by Dutch colonists. The landmarks that dominate the city today are the soaring twin towers of the World Trade Center at 110 stories each, still New York's tallest. The so-called B&T crowd, who use New York's bridges and tunnels to commute, have to face the most horrendous journey into work. Only the subway saves the city from being jammed solid at this time, and the dreaded gridlock. While some subway routes share the Manhattan Bridge with the motor traffic above it, the A train speeds its way under the East River, through to Brooklyn and beyond, via the Fulton Cranberry Tunnel. Once it leaves Manhattan, it'll still be less than halfway through its daily journey, traveling 35 miles through 36 stations, the world's longest subway ride. For visitors, it's perhaps the cheapest tour in town. For commuters, there's a terrific view of Manhattan twice a day. The Alice train, as the controllers call it, takes an hour and a half from end to end, winding its way through the depths of Brooklyn, pausing at JFK Airport before finally reaching its destination, Rockaway Beach, on the shores of the Atlantic.
The A train is a great train, the longest train ride for $1 in the world. It starts in a dense city neighborhood and it ends at the shores of the Atlantic Ocean. I mean, where are you going to get a ride like that? People say the rattle, the rumble of the subway, and it sways and it's hot and noxious. To me, a subway line runs on silk. It's smooth, it's wonderful. We're nothing without it.
You'll find New York is mighty, mighty pretty.
There is no city without the subway. As there is no Breslin in New York without the subway, there would be no city of New York without the subway.
Oh, get your car or airplane. You'll find you take the A-train. Yeah. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We'd like to thank each and every one of you for coming out.
coming in my tater. The Lord of Brooklyn, busting and cuffing. The street across the front call, you get a beat. Rip, 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 rip on the system. Rip, 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 rip on the system.
Down the steps to the depths while toys slept. Endorsed my name on a train like a bank check. Spit the tip to his drips, black smoke. They whip letter after letter like tic-tac-toe throw. Up a tag, rag, the blue blank panel. Flannel clothes of the vandals did my ink and enamel. Underground on the tracks on my way to take color. I was raised on the rail, a male Scorpio felon. Got the uni taped up in the bag, don't want it. Tell my name in blood. I'm a youth that's hunted. Bought the tracks like a rat with the sight like night vision. Star for fame, so I bombed the system. Bombed the system.
We are the originator, not coming in my tater. The Lord of Brooklyn, busting and cuffing. The street across the front call, you get a beat. Rip, 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 rip on the system. Rip, 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 rip on the system.
Katie's back to baby, sucking the van on face, a magic marker, jungle creeping the river, blast a fuck smash,